At 1:07 a.m., the baby monitor on the kitchen counter picked up a voice that wasn't supposed to be there. A man's voice, low and soft, whispering to my client's toddler in the dark. I was alone in that house with two sleeping children, and someone was in Mason's nursery talking to him like he'd been invited. My name is Caleb Briscoe. I'm 21, a junior nursing student at Belmont University in Nashville, and I've been babysitting since I was 16. Dozens of jobs, weekend afternoons, school pickup runs, sometimes staying until the parents got home from dinner around 11. But they were always daytime gigs, or at least they were always in my home time zone, my familiar world. Home by dinner time, back in my own apartment by midnight. My mom raised me in Murfreesboro, about 30 minutes south of Nashville, and babysitting's how I've paid for tuition and books without taking out loans my parents couldn't help with. My dad works in construction. My mom's a medical assistant. They both worked their whole lives and still didn't have the cash for college, so I figured out the math early. Babysitting, work-study, summer jobs. I'm good with kids. I have patience. I know CPR and basic first aid. I keep kids safe, and families trust me. But this was my first overnight job, and I had no idea what I was walking into. The Holloways booked me through Care.com 2 weeks before. Jenna and Scott were attending a wedding in Chattanooga, about 90 minutes away down to 24, and needed someone to stay overnight with Lily and Mason. Their house was in Brentwood, one of those upscale suburbs south of Nashville that sits between the city and Franklin, where the homes sit on big lots, and the streets have names like Meadowlark Lane and Ivy Hill Drive. The neighborhood was quiet, wooded, built around cul-de-sacs that backed up to greenbelts, the kind of place where you could see the thought that went into planning it, every element designed to feel safe and exclusive and separated from the chaos of the city proper. I drove out there on a Saturday afternoon to meet them and do the walkthrough. The house was a split-level, nice, newer construction, good bones, the kind of place where people had money and weren't embarrassed about it. Jenna was friendly in that way that money makes possible. She showed me the kitchen, the pantry stocked with name-brand snacks, the kids' bedrooms upstairs with nightlights shaped like stars. She seemed relaxed, comfortable leaving her children with a stranger. Scott checked the front door lock twice, then seemed satisfied. They left around 6 p.m. in a silver sedan heading toward a 65, and I was alone in someone else's house with two kids I'd met twice. I put the kids down by 8:30. Lily, who's 4, went down easy with a story about a rabbit who lived in a burrow and made friends with a hedgehog. Kids that age don't care if the story makes sense. They just want the sound of a voice and the safety of routine. Mason, 18 months, fussed for maybe 5 minutes before his pacifier, and a bottle of warm milk did the trick. The pediatric nursing rotation I'd just finished last semester had taught me about infant sleep and circadian rhythms and all the ways that babies' brains are still learning how to shut down. I'd held Mason before he fell asleep, rocking him gently, feeling his small body relax into that particular boneless weight that toddlers achieve right before sleep takes them. Both rooms dark, both kids breathing steady. I'd done the mechanics before. The mechanics were simple. I grabbed the baby monitor from the kitchen counter, kept it with me as I settled on the couch downstairs with my pathophysiology textbook. I had an exam Monday morning, cardiovascular system, the flow of blood and pressure, and the 1,000 ways that the human body can fail. The house was temperature controlled, the TV off, just me and the hum of the refrigerator and the soft static from the monitor. I don't know when I fell asleep, maybe around midnight, maybe earlier. My textbook was still open on my lap when the voice woke me. The monitor had volume. Jenna had turned it all the way up before she left. The sound cut through my doze like an alarm. It came through the monitor like someone had turned a dial too slowly, bringing a new frequency into being. At first it was just static, the regular white noise that baby monitors produce when nobody's talking, and then a voice emerged from underneath it. A man's voice. Low. Speaking in a way that seemed almost gentle, like he was telling a secret, like tenderness was the point, but the words weren't clear enough for me to understand. He was talking to Mason, directly to him, not to himself, not to a phone, not a recording. Someone was in that nursery, in the dark, speaking to a toddler who was supposed to be asleep. I froze. My heart went from resting to racing in the space of one breath. The book fell off my lap. I could hear my own breathing suddenly, the rush of blood in my ears. My hand moved to the monitor. I could hear fabric moving, the rustle of clothing, then the creak of the floorboards near Mason's crib. The voice kept on, still soft, still that same low register, and I realized he was humming. A lullaby, maybe, something old, something I almost recognized. Sleep now, little one, sleep now. You're safe. You're safe with me. My phone was on the coffee table. I reached for it. My hand was shaking so badly that the screen lit up, dark again, lit up again. 3 missed text messages from my study group, 1 notification from Instagram, and then nothing. No 911 button yet, no call placed yet. Then the voice stopped. Just silence on the monitor except the static again. I sat there in the dark of the living room, listening, waiting for something to change. My nursing training tried to kick in, assess, respond, don't panic, but my mind was already running through scenarios that didn't make sense. A friend of Jenna's? Someone checking on the house? A relative? No, nobody just walks into a room with a sleeping toddler at 1 a.m. That's not a social call. That's not a surprise visit. That's something else entirely. Something deliberate. I grabbed the monitor and moved to the kitchen. The counter clock read 1:07 a.m. I should have called 911 then. I know that now. I replay that moment sometimes, lying in my apartment, and I think about how everything would have been different if I'd just picked up the phone and dialed. But I needed to understand what was happening first. I needed to see. So I made my way to the stairs, one hand on the banister, my socks silent on the carpet. The second floor was dark. The hallway light was off. I remembered turning it off before I came downstairs, part of the bedtime routine, part of creating the darkness that helps kids sleep. Mason's door was open. I'd closed it at 8:30. I was certain of it. I'd held his hand as I pulled it shut, listening for the soft click of the latch. The door was latched tight when I put him down, and now it was open maybe 6 inches, and the hallway light was spilling in through that gap, creating a blade of illumination across the carpet. I could see the edge of his crib, the mobile above it with the hanging stars that rotated slowly when you wound the key, the small bookshelf with picture books organized by color the way Jenna had arranged them. Nothing moving, nothing obviously wrong in the visual. But he was in there. Someone was in there with him. I pushed the door wider. No sound, no movement. The crib was empty except for Mason, who was asleep exactly where he should be, his small hand gripping his blanket, his chest rising and falling like nothing was wrong. The room smelled like the lavender detergent from the wash, and something else underneath it, something like sweat, like another body in an enclosed space. Everything looked normal, too normal, like the voice on the monitor had been a dream, something my anxiety had produced and fed back to me, a phantom whisper that I'd imagined. Except the window. The bedroom window that faced the backyard was open. Not wide. Just enough for the spring air to move the curtains slightly, the fabric moving in that hypnotic way that fabric moves when it's caught in a breeze. It shouldn't have been open. Jenna hadn't mentioned an open window. I'd walked past this room with her during the walkthrough. She'd shown me the white-painted sill, the double-hung frame that locked with the turn of the handle. I'd watched her check it. It had been closed. I stood in that doorway for maybe 3 seconds, maybe 5. My brain was catching up with what my body already knew. Someone had been in this room. Someone had opened this window. Someone had stood at this crib and whispered to this sleeping child, and I had no idea where he'd gone. Then I heard Lily, not crying, just stirring in her room the way 4-year-olds do when they're between sleep stages, when their bodies are processing the day and their minds are making up dreams. I moved down the hallway to her door. Her room was still dark, the nightlight in the shape of a moon creating a soft glow in the corner. She was still asleep, but moving, her small body restless under her blanket, her sleep broken now by something that had disturbed the peace of the house. And I realized I couldn't stay upstairs anymore. I couldn't leave her alone while someone was moving through this house, someone who had access to the nursery, someone who knew his way around. So I scooped her up, blanket and all. She barely woke, just made a small sound and settled against my shoulder. And I headed back downstairs. But I didn't go to the living room. I didn't go back to the couch. I went to the master bedroom, the room that Jenna had shown me during the walkthrough, the room where she'd said, "In case of emergency, you can always lock yourself in here. There's a deadbolt. It's the safest room in the house." The master bedroom had a lock on the door. A real lock, the kind with a deadbolt, the kind you turn with your thumb. I got Lily onto the bed. She was half awake now, confused about the move, asking where Mommy was in that small, sleepy voice that 4-year-olds use when they're scared and trying not to be. And I locked the door. Both locks. I told her we were having a special sleepover in Mommy's room, and she seemed to accept that. Kids don't question things the way adults do. They don't demand explanations for every divergence from the normal. They just adjust. She curled up against the pillows and was asleep again within seconds. That's when I heard the baby monitor pick up movement downstairs. Footsteps, slow, moving through the main level, and then that voice again, humming the same tune but higher now, coming from the kitchen. He was walking through the house. He moved like he belonged here, like the geography of it was familiar to him. He knew where the kitchen was. He knew where the living room was. He moved like he'd been here before. I pulled up my phone. My hands were still shaking. I had the 911 cursor in my head, that mental image of what the call would look like, the numbers in sequence, the dispatcher picking up, the words I would say. But before I could dial, I heard something that stopped me cold. The basement storm door. It was closing, not slamming, a controlled, careful close. I'd walked past that door when Jenna showed me around during the daytime walkthrough. It was the kind with the metal frame and the small lock, the kind that leads to a walkout basement and out to the backyard beyond, to the greenbelt that backs up to the property. The sound was clear, unmistakable. Someone had either just come inside through it or left through it. The footsteps resumed upstairs, slower now, deliberate, heading back toward Mason's room. I dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, trained, asking me what my emergency was. I told her I was the babysitter at a house in Brentwood, Meadowlark Lane, and there was someone inside the house who shouldn't be there. She asked if I was safe. I said I was locked in the master bedroom upstairs with one of the children. She asked where the other child was. I told her my client's son was in the nursery, and I'd heard a man's voice on the baby monitor. She told me officers were being sent. Stay on the line. Don't go anywhere. Don't confront the intruder. The timeline felt infinite. 2 minutes probably felt like 20. I sat on that bed, holding Lily, listening to the dispatcher breathe on the other end of the line, and I heard that voice again, coming from Mason's room, and this time I could make out words. Just fragments. Bedtime story, buddy, just like old times. You remember stories? Daddy's back now. Daddy's here. When the police arrived 8 minutes later, though it felt like hours, they entered the house through the front door with their hands on their weapons. I heard them call out, "Police, we have a report of an intruder." I heard footsteps. I heard a door being opened carefully, and then silence. I was still on the phone with the dispatcher. She was telling me officers were inside, asking if I could still hear the voice. I couldn't. The baby monitor was still in my hand, but there was nothing coming through it except silence and the sound of my own breathing. An officer knocked on the master bedroom door. "Brentwood Police, can you open the door?" I opened it, keeping Lily behind me, and a uniformed officer was standing there with his hand still on his belt, his expression careful and professional. He asked if I was hurt. I said no. He asked about the children. I told him Mason was in the nursery downstairs, that I'd heard a man's voice on the baby monitor, that someone had been in the house. He told me to stay there, stay in that room with Lily, that they were securing the scene. 20 minutes later, they brought Derek Holloway out in handcuffs. He was in his mid-30s, thin, wearing a t-shirt and jeans, his hair dark and shoulder length. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like someone's father. When the officers led him past the master bedroom, he didn't struggle. He didn't yell. He just walked quietly, accepting the custody of the officers like he'd expected this outcome all along. They found him sitting on the floor next to Mason's crib, reading from a children's book. The book was called Where the Wild Things Are. He'd come through the basement storm door. The latch had been broken for months, hanging loose on its hinges, damaged during a previous unsupervised visit. He'd been coming to the house at night multiple times before this, watching from outside, waiting for his chance. He hadn't tried to hurt anyone. He hadn't tried to take Mason. He'd just come to see his son, to read him a story, to be a father in the way that his legal status no longer permitted. The paramedics checked on both kids. Mason was fine. He'd slept through everything. Lily was fine, a little confused about the police in her house, but unharmed. I was fine by the medical definition. No injuries. Vitals normal. Blood pressure elevated, but that was expected. Pulse fast but reasonable given the circumstances. No evidence of physical trauma. But I felt something split open in me that night. Something about safety and permission and the spaces between people that I hadn't understood before. Jenna called me from Chattanooga before the police even left. Her voice broke on the phone. She told me the story in fragments, the words coming out fast, desperate to be understood. Derek was her ex-husband, Mason's biological father, who'd lost custody 14 months ago after a domestic violence conviction. He had supervised visitation rights only, visits that had to happen in a neutral location with a supervisor present. He'd been in and out of their lives before that, a presence that had filled the house with tension and unpredictability. Jenna had never mentioned it. Not a word. Not on the application, not during the walkthrough, not in any of the preparations for me to stay overnight. She said she thought he'd respect the boundary, thought the distance would be enough, never imagined he'd break in. She kept apologizing, kept saying how sorry she was, like her apologies could retroactively protect children who weren't even mine. I didn't babysit for another month. I couldn't. The idea of being in a house where I didn't know who might show up filled me with a kind of dread that wouldn't quiet down. My mom called me when I told her what had happened. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. At the end, she said, "You did what you were supposed to do. You kept her safe." And I knew she was right. I'd made the right calls. I'd protected Lily. I'd gotten help. But the knowledge that I could have been caught off guard, that I could have missed what was happening, that I could have failed, that knowledge didn't go away. When I finally took another job, I asked for everything. A security walkthrough before the parents left, every door checked, all entry points, every lock tested, a full list of emergency contacts, including the non-emergency police number, who had custody of the children, whether anyone in the world might show up at that address who shouldn't be there, what the babysitter needed to know to keep them safe. Most of the families I asked looked surprised, like they'd never considered that information was a necessity, a baseline requirement. But they gave it to me. And that's what I tell other babysitters now, the ones who are doing it to pay for school like I was, the ones who think they're just watching kids, keeping them safe, making a little money on the side. You are not just the person in the house. You are the adult. You are the only one who can call for help. You need information, you need access, you need to know the locked doors, the broken latches, the custody orders and restraining orders, and the names of people who are not permitted. You need to know before dark falls. You need to know the layout of escape. You need to know emergency numbers and property boundaries and everything that the people who hired you take for granted. Because the darkness isn't dangerous because it's dark. It's dangerous because you can't see what's moving in it, but information gives you light. Hannah came downstairs at 9:30 and said, "The nighttime man is talking again." I was elbowed deep in the Yamamoto's sink, washing their dinner dishes, and for about 2 seconds I thought she was talking about a dream. Then I saw her face. No fear, just matter of fact, like she was reporting that her juice box was empty. That's when something in my gut shifted. "My name's Tomas Herrera. I'm 30 years old. I work for Multnomah County EMS as a paramedic. 14-hour shifts, ambulance duty, calls at 2 in the morning where someone's having a heart attack or a stroke or something's gone wrong in the dark hours when people are alone. I've been babysitting for the Yamamotos. They're neighbors in the duplex on SE Spokane Street in the Selwood neighborhood of Portland for just over a year now. Every other Friday night, like clockwork. Their kids are Hannah, 7, and Kenji, 5. I know these kids well enough that I can tell them apart by their breathing in the dark. I can tell when Hannah's really asleep and when she's just pretending. I know that Hannah's the serious one, always thinking about things, always asking questions about how the world works. Kenji's pure energy, can't sit still for 5 minutes, always bouncing off the walls. They're good kids. They like me. I've never had anything weird happen in this house before, and I definitely hadn't thought about that until Hannah said what she said. I dried my hands and walked her back upstairs. The duplex is 1940s. Craftsman construction, solid enough that you feel like you're in a fortress but not soundproof. You can hear your neighbor's TV sometimes, especially late at night when it's quiet. Their bedroom is small, maybe 12 by 14 feet. Twin beds against opposite walls, one window looking out onto southeast Spokane, with the street lamps creating an orange glow on the curtains at night. There's a dresser covered with stickers, dinosaurs and princesses, whatever kids like, a bookshelf full of picture books, and a nightlight shaped like a star in the corner. I checked everything that night, window locked tight, closet empty, nothing under the beds. I asked her what the nighttime man sounded like. She said he told stories. Good stories. That was it. Kids have imaginary friends. I'd learned that over the past year of babysitting. I told her to go back to sleep, tucked her in, and went back downstairs. The thing is, in my job, you develop a certain instinct. You learn to recognize when something's wrong in a way that your conscious mind hasn't quite caught up to yet. It's the same feeling you get when you're walking into a house call, and something about the way the doors open or the way the silence sits in the air tells you that this one's going to be bad. You don't know what bad yet. You just know. I felt it that night, but I told myself I was being paranoid. She was 7 years old. Kids talk about imaginary friends all the time. The next Friday, I showed up at 6 o'clock, same as always. Maria and Hideki headed out. They do this every other week, date night at some place in Eastmoreland with cloth napkins and expensive wine. The kids and I had pizza from Nick's on SE Milwaukee, did some coloring at the kitchen table, let them stay up for one episode of whatever cartoon was on. By 8:30, they were in bed. I was in the living room reading when Kenji came padding down the stairs in his dinosaur pajamas, the ones with the feet. "Tomas," he said, his voice small and careful, the way he gets when he's trying to remember something important. "The nighttime man says you come on Fridays because your house is loud." I stopped reading. The page went soft in my vision. My hand stayed on the book, but I wasn't reading anymore. I was just staring at the same sentence over and over, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. My apartment is 3 blocks away, on SE 13th, above an antique shop on Milwaukee. Nobody on this block knew where I lived. I'd never mentioned it in this house, not to the kids, not to their parents. I asked him slowly, carefully, what else the nighttime man had said. He rattled off details like he was reading from a list, that I worked somewhere with a vehicle that was loud, that I came at 6 o'clock on Fridays, that sometimes I brought my work clothes in a gym bag. Things he could have figured out from context, maybe. Kids notice things. They make connections. But something in me didn't accept that explanation, and I think it was the paramedic training. When something doesn't add up, you don't ignore it. You catalog it, you start asking yourself questions. I told Kenji to go back to bed. I walked him upstairs, tucked him in next to Hannah, and came back downstairs. I sat in the dark living room for maybe an hour, just sitting, trying to think of ways a 5-year-old could possibly know those details. Could he have overheard something at Selwood Park? Could he have seen my ambulance from the neighboring unit with my name on it? No, that didn't make sense. We don't park at the house. I park on the street 3 blocks away and walk. Nobody would connect that to this address. When Maria and Hideki got home at midnight, I didn't say anything. I couldn't figure out how to say it. "Hey, someone's been talking to your kids through a wall," sounds insane. I needed evidence. I needed to be sure. The next morning, I saw them on the fridge. Pictures of the nighttime man. Both kids had drawn a stick figure at the wall, not the window, the wall between units. Hana used blue marker. Kenji used red crayon. They were dated weeks apart. This was ongoing. I asked them casually if they'd drawn other pictures. No, just those two. What did he look like? Hana couldn't see his face. Kenji said it was dark. When did they hear him? Nighttime, when they were asleep. He talked quietly, but they could hear him. I didn't say anything to the Yamamotos when they got home. I told myself I needed to figure out what was actually happening first. I needed facts before I panicked them. I needed to know if I was overreacting. In my job, you see a lot of things that look like emergencies turn out to be nothing. You see a lot of things that look like nothing turn out to be emergencies. The only thing you can do is investigate. The duplex has a shared basement and a shared HVAC system. You can hear the furnace kick on from either side if you're paying attention. I'd noticed that when I first started babysitting. The sound carries through the vents, through the walls, through all those spaces in old houses where sound can hide and travel. That's how old construction works. It was built different than what they build now. They didn't worry about sound isolation the way they do now. These walls were built to let heat move, to let air flow, to be efficient. They weren't built to be private. I went back the following Friday. After the kids were asleep, after I'd done the dishes and straightened up the living room, I went into their bedroom with my flashlight, the one I use for house calls, LED, bright white light. I found the vent pretty quickly. It was a rectangular grate on the wall that separates the two units, built right into the plaster, maybe 8 inches by 4 inches. Standard setup for 1940s construction. You see them in every duplex and apartment from that era in Portland. I put my ear against the grate. The metal was cold. At first, nothing. Just the faint hum of the furnace in the basement, the pipes settling, the normal sounds of an old house at night. Then I heard it. Music. Radio music, faint but definitely there. A talk radio station. The volume was low, but it was there. And then, I swear to God, it stopped. Like someone on the other side of that wall had been listening, realized I was there, and hit the mute button. The sudden silence was louder than the sound had been. I shone the flashlight through the grate. The shaft went straight through, no dampers, nothing to block the passage, and I could see into it, far enough to know it was open. The light bounced off something metal in there, a speaker maybe. Then I heard breathing, clear, deliberate, on the other side of that wall, someone breathing in sync with my flashlight beam, like they were tracking it. The breathing stopped when I moved the light away. My heart didn't race. That's the training. In emergencies, you don't panic. You go quiet. You catalog. You act. My hands were steady when I pulled out my phone and called 911. My heart didn't race. That's the training. In emergencies, you go quiet. You catalog. You act. My hands were steady when I pulled out my phone and called 911. I told the dispatcher what I'd found. I didn't say I was scared. I said I was concerned about unauthorized communication with minors. That was accurate. I said there was evidence of sustained contact through a shared HVAC vent. I said I was a paramedic and I was taking it seriously, and I needed police present. The dispatcher said to remain in the home and keep the children safe. Officers would arrive shortly. The police showed up about 12 minutes later. 2 officers, calm, professional, the kind of people who've dealt with worse things and know how to handle this without losing their minds. I let them into the Yamamoto's unit and showed them the vent. I explained the situation, Hana saying the nighttime man was talking, Kenji saying he knew my schedule, the drawings on the fridge, the voice I'd heard, the breathing on the other side of the vent. They listened. They took notes. They didn't dismiss it. Then I told them which unit was next door. They came back 40 minutes later with the tenant's landlord and a paper that said warrant on it. I was in the living room with the kids who'd slept through everything, thank God. One of the officers sat down across from me. His name was Morrison. He told me what they'd found. The tenant's name was Glenn Prewitt, 42 years old, worked remotely for an IT consulting firm, quiet tenant, kept to himself. Background check came back clean. No priors, nothing flagged. They'd found his unit set up with a chair positioned against the wall, angled toward the vent. There was a small speaker connected to an old laptop. There were notebooks, filled with observations about the kids' routines, what time they went to bed, what they talked about during the day, what they were scared of, what they liked, what they wanted for their birthdays. He'd recorded some of their conversations. He had an external drive with audio files organized by date. He'd been documenting them like a naturalist observing animals. He hadn't physically entered the home. He'd never tried the doors. He'd never climbed through a window. He'd been talking to them through the wall for 5 months. 5 months, starting from when he moved in, building a relationship, learning their names, their fears, their routines, building something that looked like trust from his side of the wall. The officer asked if the children had reported anything unusual. I said Hannah called him the nighttime man, and Kenji said he knew specific details about my schedule and my apartment. That's when the officer's expression changed, not shock, but a certain kind of acknowledgement. This wasn't just inappropriate. This was systematic. This was grooming. Glenn Prewitt was arrested that night. They took him out of the building in handcuffs while I was sitting in the Yamamoto's living room watching the kids sleep. He had to walk past the shared wall where he'd been talking to them. I wonder if he heard the police, if he heard them coming for him. I wonder if he'd been listening when I called 911. I wonder if he'd tried to delete those files on the laptop. The Yamamotos were devastated, angry, scared all at once when they came home at 2 a.m. and found police cars outside their house. There were 2 cars parked on SE Spokane, lights off but clearly visible. Maria's face went white when she saw them. Hideki immediately thought something had happened to the kids. I told them everyone was safe, the kids were asleep, but there was a situation in the neighboring unit. I watched them try to process that. Maria asked me what had happened. I told them they needed to talk to the police, but that their kids were safe. Morrison explained the situation to Maria and Hideki in their living room. I could see Maria's hands shaking. Hideki's face went hard, the way a parent's face gets when they realize their child is in danger, or was in danger. The anger came after. The anger always comes after the fear. Maria asked me if I'd noticed anything before that night. I said no, which was true in the way that matters legally, but it wasn't true in the way that mattered to me. I had noticed. I'd felt it. Something in my gut had been wrong that first night when Hannah came downstairs. I'd just been slow to act on it, slow to follow the feeling, slow to investigate. I'd waited until the next Friday. I'd waited until I had evidence. But I acted when it counted. That's what I told myself, and that's what I told them. I acted. The kids are safe. He's in custody. That's what matters. They asked about what he'd said to the kids, what he'd asked them. Morrison said sustained grooming behavior, building relationship, building trust. But no active attempt at access, no proposition, no request for photos or video. It was still systematic, still predatory, still illegal, still wrong. But it hadn't gone as far as it could have gone. Still, I've thought about what would have happened if I hadn't checked that vent. If I'd convinced myself it was imagination. If I'd dismissed what those kids were telling me because they couldn't quite articulate what was happening. If I'd waited for the next babysitting night, or the one after that, what would he have done in another month, another 3 months? Would he have escalated? Would he have asked the kids to open the door one night when they thought their parents were asleep? Would he have tried something different? I don't know. Morrison told me that Prewitt had no prior arrests, no prior incidents, nothing on record that would have flagged him. He had a job, a lease, money in the bank. He looked like anybody else. The only thing he did wrong was discover the vent and then exploit it. The only thing he did wrong was see an opportunity to contact children who weren't his and take it. I see him sometimes in my head at night when I can't sleep. I see him sitting in that chair, ear to the vent, listening to the kids sleep. I see him taking notes about what they said. I see the speaker, the laptop, the external drive full of recordings. I see him at work during the day, pretending to be normal, pretending to be a person, and then coming home and pressing his ear to that vent and whispering stories to children through a wall. The thing about shared wall housing, duplexes, apartments, older townhouses, any place where you live separated from your neighbors by just plaster and wood, is that they were built with assumptions about privacy that don't hold up anymore. Maybe they never did. The HVAC vents, the plumbing chases, sometimes just gaps in the construction where studs don't quite meet or where settling has open seams you can't see without a flashlight. Sound travels through all of those spaces. So do voices. So does attention, in a way that's hard to explain but easy to feel once you know what you're listening for. If you live in one of these places and your kids mention voices, or an imaginary friend who knows specific things they shouldn't know, or drawings of people standing at the walls instead of windows, take it seriously. Don't dismiss it. Don't tell yourself kids have imaginary friends. Inspect the vents. Check for gaps. Listen yourself. Get your ear to the wall if you have to. Look for a chair on the other side, a speaker, a laptop. And if something's wrong, if you hear something on the other side that shouldn't be there, report it to the landlord and the police. Don't convince yourself it's nothing. Don't wait for more evidence. Don't second-guess your instinct. I still babysit for the Yamamotos. They asked if I'd stay, and I said yes. The kids needed some kind of normal. Everything else in their lives had changed, and they needed someone they recognized, someone they trusted. I could be that person. I could make sure nothing like that happened again. But now when I put them to bed, I check that vent first. I run my finger along the grate. I listen for anything on the other side. I make sure the grate is secure, and I make sure they know that if they hear anything at all, even if it seems friendly, even if it seems harmless, even if it sounds like it's just telling stories, they come get me right away. I tell them that nobody should be talking to them through the walls. Nobody should know things about them that they don't remember telling. Nobody should be listening when they think they're alone. Hannah asked me once if the nighttime man was really gone. I told her yes. I told her he wasn't coming back. And I told her something that I think every kid needs to hear. That adults are supposed to listen when kids say something's wrong, even if it sounds strange. Especially then. Especially when it doesn't make sense. That's when you listen hardest. That's when you pay attention. That's when you investigate, no matter how paranoid it might make you feel. I was making scrambled eggs at 6:30 in the morning when I saw it. The ring log. 2 minutes at 2:14 a.m. Someone opened the back door, was inside my daughter's house, and closed it again. I was asleep on the couch, 15 feet away, with 3 children upstairs. My name is Phyllis Okonkwo. I'm 64 years old, and I spent 38 years teaching kindergarten at Hillsmere Elementary in Annapolis. 38 years of tying shoelaces, wiping noses, settling disputes over blocks and crayons, teaching 5-, 6-, and 7-year-olds how to share toys, sit still for more than 3 minutes without falling apart. It sounds simple. It isn't. Teaching young children teaches you to notice everything. The way a child holds a pencil tells you about their grip strength, their motor development, their confidence in their own body. The way they avoid eye contact tells you whether they're tired or afraid or just distracted. I learned to see what children don't say out loud. My husband, Emeka, used to laugh at me. He was a civil engineer, all logic and measurements and blueprints, but he understood. He understood that I brought that noticing home with me. I couldn't turn it off. Couldn't see a room without noting the exits, couldn't watch someone without assessing their state of mind. That skill, that habit of noticing, it never left me. It's still there, even now that I'm retired, even now that I'm 64 years old, and Emeka's been gone for 4 years, and I'm spending my Saturday nights in my daughter's living room watching her 2 kids and their friend Ethan while she and her husband go to dinner or a movie. Even now. This was Annapolis, Hillsmere Shores, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, where kids played in the street until the streetlights came on, where we waved to our neighbors from our porch swings and felt genuinely safe. You could leave your back door unlocked. You could leave your front door unlocked. Nobody broke into houses here. Nobody had to. The culture of the neighborhood, that's what I mean, the culture was built on trust. Trust that your neighbors would look after each other's property. Trust that the area police drove by regularly. Trust that crime happened somewhere else, somewhere urban and dangerous and far from here. My daughter Adazi's house was a 1970s colonial on Carroll Drive. Pale brick with black shutters, screened-in back porch, a detached shed out back. From the upstairs window, you could see the Chesapeake Bay if you knew where to look. We were 2 streets over from my place on Hillsmere Drive. This neighborhood, Bay Ridge Road, Quiet Waters Park, the South River area, it had never given me a reason not to trust it. Never. In all the years I'd lived here, nothing bad had ever happened. The house smelled like dinner. Adaz had made jollof rice before she left, that beautiful rice with tomatoes and peppers that Emeka's mother taught her to make. The smell lingered in the kitchen, warm and comfortable. I settled into my rhythm that evening, the one I'd developed over decades of tending to children. Dinner at 6, bath time at 7, bedtime routine at 8, stories and songs, the slow wind down that tells a child's nervous system that sleep is coming. I'd gotten all 3 kids to sleep by 9 p.m. Enkem and Chisholm, my grandchildren, knew that Grandma Phyllis meant bedtime. No negotiation. They went down easy, tired from playing. Ethan was asleep in the guest room by 9:15. I made myself a cup of tea. Adaz had left chamomile and honey on the counter. I settled into the couch in the living room with the television on low, just enough noise to keep me from feeling alone in the house, but quiet enough that I could hear if any of the children called out. I'd trained myself to sleep lightly on these nights, one ear always listening, one part of my brain always available to a child's voice. I woke up around 6 a.m. when the first light came through the front windows. The couch had left an imprint on my left cheek. My neck was a little stiff. My back complained as I stood up. 64 isn't young. The body feels every position you sleep in. I stretched, padded into the kitchen in my socks, and turned on the coffee maker. I was cooking. Scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit from Adaz's refrigerator. My hands were moving through the routine. Bowl, whisk, butter in the pan, the eggs slowly turning from liquid to set, when I thought to check the iPad on the kitchen counter. Adaz always left it there. Ring app right on the home screen. I'd looked at it before, just scrolling through, making sure the front porch camera was working properly, checking that the settings were right. I'm comfortable with technology. You don't teach for 38 years without learning to navigate the tools that come along. But this time, I had a different feeling. Something small. A whisper of a thought. Check the logs. Just look. The Ring app shows every door. Front door, back door, garage. Every time a door opens or closes, the system logs the timestamp and shows a brief video clip if there was any motion. I was scrolling through the activity from the night before, the hours when Enkem and Chisholm and Ethan were asleep, when I was asleep on that couch, when I saw it. My hand stopped moving. The butter in the pan was starting to brown. 2:14 a.m. Backdoor sensor triggered. Opened. 2:16 a.m. Backdoor sensor triggered. Closed. I touched the timestamps again. My finger wasn't steady. 2 minutes. Someone had opened that door, been inside for 2 minutes, and closed it. And I had been asleep on the couch in the living room, not 20 feet from that back porch and back door. The children were upstairs, in their bedrooms, their bedroom doors not locked, their windows not locked, just sleeping. Vulnerable in that way children are when they sleep. I set the iPad down. I turned off the stove. The eggs in the bowl were beginning to set a little as they sat. I didn't care. I looked at the back door from where I stood in the kitchen. It was locked now. The deadbolt was thrown. The door looked exactly as it should look, ordinary, safe, but the iPad said otherwise. I stood there. The eggs were starting to stick to the bowl. I didn't care. My mind was doing the work it had learned to do in 38 years of classrooms, the work of noticing patterns, of building connections between small observations, of looking for what didn't belong. That's what teaching is. You watch children and you notice. You notice who's struggling with letters, who's not sleeping enough, who's being hurt at home. You notice these patterns because children can't always tell you. So you develop the skill of seeing. I scrolled back further in the log. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, there. March 28th at 1:47 a.m. back door. Opened, closed, 2 minutes 50 seconds, and again. March 28th at 2:33 a.m. back door. 3 minutes. Wait, that wasn't right. I looked again. No, it was earlier in the month, March 22nd at 1:52 a.m., and again, March 18th at 2:11 a.m., and again, March 14th at 2:04 a.m. 5 entries. 5 times in the past month, someone had opened and closed the back door of my daughter's house in the middle of the night, all of them between 1:47 a.m. and 2:33 a.m., all of them lasting between 2 and 3 minutes each. All of them while the house was either empty or occupied only by sleeping people, Adaz and her husband, or the children, or in this case, me. I walked the house methodically. The television was still there. Adazi's laptop on the dining room table, closed and waiting. The small jade plant she kept on the shelf, untouched. My eyes were cataloging, assessing. Nothing was missing, nothing was visibly moved, nothing was disturbed. But someone had been inside. While we slept. While the children slept, their bedroom doors open, their small bodies defenseless in the dark. I called Adaz before I sat down. My voice was steady. I'd learned to keep my voice steady in classrooms for 38 years, learned to deliver bad news to children in ways they could understand. Come home. I need to show you something. She came home immediately, left her office on Main Street in downtown Annapolis, left her meetings, came to Carroll Drive. Her car was in the driveway by 7:40 a.m. We didn't hug. We went straight to the iPad. We walked the house together, me pointing at each ring log entry on the screen, her face getting paler with each one. The back porch, the screen door unlatched, the wooden back door locked now but otherwise ordinary, like any back door in any suburban house. The kitchen, where I made breakfast. The living room, where I slept. The hallway that led to the children's rooms. We looked at Nkem's room, Chisholm's room, the guest room where Ethan had slept. Nothing was disturbed, nothing was taken. But the evidence was right there in the ring log, timestamp after timestamp, and we both understood what it meant. Someone had walked through this house in the dark, someone had moved through these rooms, while the children slept, while I slept, while no locks had stopped them. That's when I started looking for the physical evidence. I was a teacher. I knew to look carefully. I'd looked at thousands of things carefully. Children's artwork, children's eyes, the way they marked on paper. I knew how to see the kitchen tile near the back door. There. Not obvious unless you looked, unless you taught yourself to look. A smudge, a partial footprint barely visible, a residue of drying mud that had been tracked in from outside. The tread of a sneaker. Distinctive, clear if you knew what you were looking at. Not large, not an adult's shoe, a teenager's foot, size 8 or 9, someone young. I talked to the neighbors that afternoon, the Delgados, 3 houses down on Carroll Drive. I rang their doorbell and asked straight out. They mentioned their back door being unlocked twice in the past month. They'd assumed they'd forgotten to lock it. But now they remembered. Both times had been in the early morning hours. Both times they couldn't explain how it had happened. The Marshalls across the street. I knew them from neighborhood events, from seeing them at Quiet Waters Park. They said their dog had been barking at 2 a.m. on at least 3 separate nights in the past month, pacing the back fence, reacting to something they couldn't see. The dog had never done that before. He was a calm dog, a retriever, not reactive, but something had disturbed him in the dark. Everyone in Hillsmere Shores left their doors unlocked. It was the culture of the place, safe neighborhood, quiet. Nobody locks their doors in a place like this. That was the story we all told ourselves. The story I had told myself for decades. You live here. You're safe. Nobody breaks into houses. Nobody has to. The trust is the security. But trust doesn't show up in the ring log. Adaz called the police that afternoon. An officer came by the house by 2 p.m., took a report, reviewed the ring footage on the iPad. He seemed professional but not particularly concerned. No theft, no forced entry signs, no violence, no disturbance. Just a door opened and closed. He was polite. He filed a report, but I could see in his eyes that he didn't think this was a priority. Then I told him about the pattern, the multiple entries, the consistent timing, between 1:47 and 2:33 a.m., all in the same narrow window, the footprint, the teenager's shoe. Something shifted in his expression. He leaned closer to the iPad. He asked to see the logs again. How many? He asked. 5 times that I've found, I said. Possibly more if I keep scrolling. He took photographs of the shoe print on the tile. He asked detailed questions about the back porch, the back door, the locks, whether they were deadbolts or simple knobs. He asked when Adiz had first noticed anything unusual. He started asking the right questions. They set up a secondary camera on the back porch. Professional equipment this time, not just the doorbell ring with its limited motion detection. An actual surveillance camera pointed at the back of the house, mounted in the eave, hidden well enough that someone approaching in the dark wouldn't notice it, positioned to capture anyone who approached the back porch or the back door. The officer didn't tell us he was doing this. He just showed up with a technician, worked quietly for an hour, and left. 2 nights later, at 2:23 a.m., the camera recorded everything. Someone entering the yard from the direction of Carroll Drive, walking quietly toward the back porch. Trying the screen door, it opened easily, the latch had never been tightened. Trying the back door. It was locked that night. We'd made sure of it. He pushed on it a few times, then turned to go. He paused in the doorway, standing very still for a moment, as if listening. Then he left the way he came. The police were waiting. They stopped him before he'd made it 2 houses down Carroll Drive. He didn't run. He didn't resist. Tyler Rask, 16 years old, 4 houses down from Adiz's place, a teenager I'd seen around the neighborhood, quiet kid, pale, dark circles under his eyes, always seemed tired. The kind of kid who walks to the convenience store in the afternoon and doesn't talk much to people. No criminal record, no history of violence, no obvious reason for any of this. He'd been walking into unlocked houses in Hillsmere Shores for 8 months. At least a dozen homes, never stealing, never leaving a mark, never harming anyone. Just walking through the rooms in the dark, standing in doorways, sitting in a chair for a few minutes. The police and a psychologist determined it was compulsive behavior. OCD, severe untreated insomnia. A teenager whose brain had locked onto this ritual the way some brains do, and he couldn't stop doing it no matter how hard he tried. His parents said he couldn't explain why. He just felt compelled. He had to check. He had to see. He had to walk through these houses. There was no logic to it, no fantasy of theft, no desire to hurt anyone. Just the compulsion, night after night, wearing him down until it was the only thing his brain would let him do at 2 a.m. That changed things in Hillsmere Shores. Quietly, but completely. Within a week, you started seeing people check their doors before bed. You started seeing new ring cameras being installed, more lights on back porches, deadbolts being upgraded. The Delgados put a lock on their screen door. The Marshalls added a door sensor. Suddenly, the cultural understanding that we didn't need locks here, that trust was enough, suddenly that was gone. The neighborhood didn't feel quite as safe, even though it arguably became safer once everyone started locking up. The assumption that our quiet streets were immune to intrusion, that was gone. I think about that night sometimes. I wake up and think about it. I woke up at 6 a.m., made breakfast, and never knew that 2 hours before, at 4 a.m., while I was sleeping 18 feet away on that couch, a teenager had walked through the kitchen in the dark, had walked past the couch where I was lying, unconscious and vulnerable, had walked down the hallway toward the stairway to the children's rooms. He was there in the house, in the dark, with my grandchildren, with Ethan. He stood at the bottom of the stairs. The police camera didn't show this part. He was inside the house, but later Tyler said he stood there for about 90 seconds, just standing, listening to them sleep, to their breathing in the rooms above. Then he turned back. He didn't go up. The police never explained why. Maybe he heard something. Maybe a child shifted in bed and made a sound that broke through the compulsion for just that moment. Maybe his own conscience, buried under the OCD, under the insomnia, under whatever was driving him. Maybe it surfaced long enough to make him understand that there were real people, real children, real lives behind those doors. Maybe something in his brain forced him to stop. I'll never know for certain, but I do know this. I check every door now, every single night. The back door, the front door, the sliding glass door that leads to the patio. I check them twice. Adaz does too. 38 years of teaching taught me to notice what matters: a locked door, a reviewed security log, a willingness to call the police when something is wrong. These are not paranoia. They are attention. They are the exact same skill that lets you see a child who's struggling with their phonics, who's crying at drop-off, who's wearing the same shirt 3 days in a row, and you get them help before they fall behind. They are the skill of noticing what matters and then acting. If your teenager is awake at 2 a.m. and leaving the house night after night, you need to know. You need to pay attention. You need to ask questions. If you find evidence of unauthorized entry, even without theft, even without clear violence, you need to report it. Don't assume it was a mistake. Don't assume you left the door unlocked. Report it. Let it be on record. That record can save someone else. If you live in a place that feels safe, lock the door anyway. The Chesapeake Bay is beautiful from my daughter's upstairs window. Hillsmere Shores is a good neighborhood. The people are kind. The streets are quiet. The culture is built on trust and neighborliness. But good places can hide compulsions. Good neighborhoods can hide teenagers who are struggling so badly that they're driven to walk through unlocked houses in the dark. Good places can hide the kind of pain that nobody saw coming. Lock every door, every night. Review the logs if you have them. Pay attention. Teach your children to pay attention, just like I spent 38 years teaching children to do. Notice what matters. Notice when something doesn't belong. Notice when a pattern breaks. It might be nothing, but it might be the difference between a teenager getting help and a tragedy nobody saw coming.